What's going on, guys? Steve from the Urban Worm Company here. We're going to change things up just a little bit. I normally talk to you on YouTube videos. It's me talking to you like this, and it's a little bit scripted, and all you see is just text and a little bit of video on the screen. We're going to do something where we get our hands a little bit dirty each week with something that right now I'm just going to call the weekly worm farm check-in. So I've got this worm farm right here. It's just simple Rubbermaid bin. It's got bedding, it's got worms, it's got food waste, all the stuff you'd have in a worm farm. We're just going to check in on it every week. We're going to kind of talk about a few of the same things every week, like what's the outside temperature, what's the inside temperature inside the barn here, what's the temperature inside the vermicompost. We're going to say, what's a vermicompost look like? What did we feed last time? When did we feed? And if I see any issues, then I'm going to give my recommendations to myself and to you about how I would go ahead and fix the issues that I'm seeing in this budget worm farm. I noticed that people get really a lot more excited about videos when I actually show hands-on type stuff. And that's what we're going to do here. All right, so I'm just going to shut my mouth. We're going to put the camera right there, put my cell phone right on top of there. We're going to look down into this worm farm, talk about things, and yeah, we'll let you know what's going on inside this bin. So let's get started. All right, guys, uncovering the worm farm here. Apologize for the audio right now. My mic is still charging, so sorry about that. Anyway, one thing I wanted to show you guys was I've got a few different thermometers here. So I just checked my phone. Temperature is 70 degrees outside. It's currently 77 degrees inside the barn. 53% humidity, and as you can see, the temperature is about 65 degrees in the vermicompost. We're coming out of the really hot season here in Philadelphia, and yeah, it's August, but it feels like it's actually September, October, which is gorgeous. So I don't expect the temperatures to stay this way. Anyway, this is a worm farm I actually started a long time ago. This was actually the basis for my how to start a worm farm video that you guys can find on the channel elsewhere. There's actually a decent amount of worms in here. I actually had most of them towards the surface, but this worm farm has not been fed in a long time, and we're going to actually feed it today. But you can see that we've got some, pretty decent sized red wigglers in here. One of the things I want to tell you guys about was, if you look at this worm, actually this is still a red wiggler because I can still see a little bit of a raised clitellum. Let me go ahead and find a different one. This is a better example. So one of the things people get confused on is what kind of worms they have. A lot of people think they have red wigglers when what they really have are Indian blues. Indian blues are a little different. They're different shaped a little bit. I mean, they're pretty similar to the red wiggler, but if you look right here, you can see the raised clitellum, and that's a telltale sign there of the red wiggler, as is this yellowish tail. Indian blues are actually going to be a little bit skinnier. They're not going to have a raised clitellum, and they're going to thrash around a bit more in your hand. So these are kind of the normal red wigglers that you would expect. This bin has been processed really well. You can see most everything is crumbly and dark. Not much that is showing up that's like not been processed. You see a couple little things like that, but this bin is pretty much ready to be fed. It feels like if I go ahead and squeeze it in my hands, you can actually see some water coming out. So this is a little bit wetter than what we'd really want. You want like 1 or 2 drops, and I'm getting a lot more than that. If you can see that stuff coming out of my fingers. Right about 70% is where we really want this worm farm to be, and we're probably more like 75 or 80. So if I dig around in here a little bit more, we're going to find little pockets of worms, and these things are pretty evenly distributed. But if we had just fed this thing something like a watermelon or cantaloupe or something like that, you would see a lot of these worms right at the surface eating away at that waste, and it would look a lot more dense. But these worms are pretty evenly distributed throughout this worm farm. What I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and feed this bad boy. I've got a mix of some stuff that was just outside my patio door. I eat a lot of bananas, we eat some apples, and we drink a lot of coffee. So we have a lot of coffee grounds around here, around the Churchill household. So we're going to go ahead and make a mix of that food waste, and probably today use pit moss, which is a nice, easy bedding to use. I just find that it breaks down really nicely. We also use coconut core paper. I think today we're just going to stick with pit moss just to keep things simple, and maybe in the next few weeks we'll talk about paper, coconut core, and stuff like that. Here we go. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. I showed you the food waste I was talking about before with the apple core and the banana peels and the coffee. And I'm just gonna go ahead and dump this all in as is. You can see it's a ton of coffee grounds. Looks like we got some pine needles in there. I really don't like having those in there. Those just kind of blew in with the with some of the windstorms that we've had here lately. So we'll go ahead and get rid of those. I could go ahead and chop up some of these things like the banana peels and, you know, the filters and the apple core, but I just want to show you that you can be a really lazy vermicomposter and still have it work for you. So I'm just going to leave this stuff as is. I'm going to go ahead and take stuff called pit moss, and if you're not familiar with pit moss, it is recycled paper. It's PITTMOSS. It's made by the company called Pit Moss, and it's meant to be like a peat moss kind of alternative. And I'm going to use about an equal amount of this pit moss to the food waste in terms of volume. I normally would recommend you being more like 2 to 1, but again, with coffee grounds, they don't hold that much water. They're not going to break down and release a ton of water. So I'm okay going down to 1 to 1, and even sometimes I'll just put coffee grounds in my worm farm and not even add bedding. So normally I would recommend that you add bedding. In this case, we're not going to do that. Now this stuff is pretty dry. Our bin, like I was talking about earlier, is wetter than you typically want it to be. So one thing we could do is probably take this feeding. We're going to mix this up here. Right now I'm just adding a bit of water because the pit moss is really dry. Is to take this and mix it up with all the other material in the bin, you know, from top to bottom. I'm really not worried about doing a continuous flow style worm farm just yet. There's really not that much material in the bin, and what I do have is sort of wet. So this stuff can be dry going in because the existing vermicompost in our worm farm is already too wet. So we can use some of this really dry material to soak up the excess moisture that already exists in our current worm farm. But this is really, really dry, and I don't want it to dry out too much. Worms breathe through their skin, so they really need moisture. So I don't want to underdo the moisture too much. So I'm just going to add a few sprays of this of water here. Going to mix it up by hand, and then we'll go ahead and put it in the worm farm. It's really dry stuff. I'll go ahead and break apart this apple core. Most food waste is actually around 80 to 90% water, which is way wetter than what you want a normal worm farm to be. Apple cores are probably like 90% water. They break down fairly quickly. We only have one apple core in here, so we really don't have that much. So this is still a bit dry to the touch, so I'm just gonna go ahead and, you know what? I'm gonna speed things up a little bit. I would never recommend pouring water into a worm farm. Of course, this isn't our worm farm. This is just the mortar tray that we're using to prepare our food waste, or prepare our feeding here. So I'm just gonna take this, do this by hand. It's pretty tacky to the touch right now. It's not wet, it's not clumpy, so the water content isn't that high, but I think it's going to be good considering what else is going on in our worm bin in terms of excess moisture. So we've got this mixed up. Let's go ahead and put it into our worm farm. Now this is a big feeding. I'm probably adding 25% to it with just this single feeding, but I'm not worried about it because so much of it is that pit moss. So just empty all of it in there, and I'm just going to mix this up by hand. Got a decent worm population in there. So I'm just gonna mix all of this stuff together. It's actually gonna help it all break down when it's all exposed to the moisture and all the microbes that are existing in the vermicompost. Worms aren't enjoying what I'm doing right now. Maybe some of them are breeding down there and I just screwed them up, but that's okay. They'll forgive me. So I'm not gonna feed this thing for probably another week or two, probably 2 weeks. I will come back and check the moisture. And so speaking of moisture, if I pick this up, and this is mixed with a lot of that pit moss, if I squeeze it in my hands, I'm still getting more than like a single drop. I'm getting quite a bit. So you can see that even with the dry stuff I put in, there was a lot of excess moisture in there. Problem with excess moisture is it can cause anaerobic pockets in your vermicompost as the water displaces the air. The microbes use up the available oxygen in that water or in that liquid, and it can become anaerobic. Your nose is going to tell you when things are getting anaerobic. Again, you can kind of see some water that's dripping out of between my fingers. So this is still plenty moist. I'm not really worried about that. So at this point, we're going to just put our bubble wrap on top of there. I really like bubble wrap for a budget worm farm like this. It creates condensation on the underside of the bubble wrap and sort of pulls the worms higher, and it's cheap. So you can get something more fancy like the Urban Worm Blanket, doesn't actually trap the water, it sort of absorbs some moisture, and in that way can kind of regulate the moisture in the worm bin. But in this case, I'm going to use as many budget materials as I can possibly find. So we're just going to put this bubble wrap right on here. We're going to poke this thermometer through here, and we're going to check on this worm farm here in about, we'll call it a week or two. All right, we'll see you guys.
All right, guys, hope you enjoyed that. We're going to check in here maybe next week, maybe a couple weeks. May not truly be the weekly worm farm check-in. If you would, please let me know in the comments if you found this helpful or if you just want me to ditch it and go back to the normal stuff I was doing before. I'm still going to do the instructional videos like I was doing, but I want to see if this is something you'd like to see more of. So drop me a note in the comments, hit subscribe if you want to see more of these, and yeah, hopefully see you next week.